Hi everybody, welcome to Dynamo Sword Channel. I'm David and today on Dynamo Sword Channel I will be reviewing the Iron Wolf Forge pattern welded Type 14 arming sword. So how does this sword fare amongst other arming swords in its price range, as well as hold up to the historical Type 14 it's based on? Well, stay tuned, we'll find out. This arming sword offered by Iron Wolf Forge is based on a type of late 13th to mid 14th century arming sword. Its blade type in the oak typology is what would be classified as a Type 14. Now the Type 14 was a unique blade type that differed from other swords in the typology by having a shorter than average blade length of 24 inches, and that moved up generally to about 30 inches at its longest. Another unique feature of the blade is its broad base width that gradually tapers down to an acute point, giving it a very triangular profile. It is one of the types of the typology to feature fullering, which primarily was singular and broad, slightly tapering with the blade profile and ending at or just below the midsection. Cross sections of Type 14 blades were almost exclusively lanicular, with a few later examples having slight diamond cross sections. All swords of the type so far classified are of single-handed arming sword grip length. Now, due to its prominence as a cut-focused blade of the late 13th century and mid 14th century, Oakeshott placed the Type 14 in Group 1 of his sword groups. Now, Group 1 is defined by prominently being of swords with lanicular cut-focused blades. Now, this is where the Type 14 has a unique placement, as it is the most acute of Group 1 swords, making a defining feature of its development a transitional one. Now, much of this has to do with the advancements in armor in the early part of the 14th century, as plate armor began seeing further development and more universal use, making the cut-focused blades of Group 1 more or less obsolete, and sparking the development of the more thrust-focused blades of Group 2. The Type 14 hilt style was very consistent, having Oakeshott classify it to its own exclusive sword family, the Family B. Almost, if not all, swords featured in the family are Type 14. The Family B categorizes arming swords featuring bossed wheel pommels of Type J and K and thin arched crossguards, typically of styles 1, 4, 6, 7, with 7 being its most prominent type. Now, the late 13th to early 14th century of medieval Europe was a very turbulent time. Many nations were at war, with many civil wars of both political and religious instigation being fought. England was at the tail end of the 100 Years' War with France, as well as facing the short-lived civil rebellion of the Percy family in the north. The French too, while fending off England, faced civil disputes over the heir to their empty throne. Now, the Type 14 was developed at a time when the sword would be in frequent use and seemed to be favored by these swordsmen of England and France compared to other regions of Europe, which favored other blade types prominent at the time, such as the Type 12 and the Type 13. Oddly enough, the Type 14 didn't have that much of a long lifespan as a battlefield weapon. Based on the artistic imagery of the period, such as paintings and effigies, as well as historical swords found, the Type 14 seems to have been in use for only about 70 years or so. As mentioned before, much of that could have been due to its transitional design status as well as its narrower region of use. Now, this sword isn't specified by the maker to be a direct replica of any historical example, but if we do look at the book Records of the Medieval Sword, we do see a few similarly designed swords that match the replica. Now, the most similar one I found was featured in the Multiple Miscellaneous chapter as 2514 on page 229, as well as another one that was quite similar in the Type 14 chapter as 14.4, which is found on page 19. Now, even though it was a less lived sword design compared to others, it's hard not to admire the Type 14 and its contribution to the evolution of sword design, as well as being the transition point of the two sword groups, paving the way for the acute thrusting swords of later centuries to gain dominance on the battlefield. Now we'll have an overall look at all the statistics of this sword. So the overall length of this sword is 35 inches. It has a weight of 2.5 pounds with a point of balance at right about 3 inches from the hilt. The center of percussion is right at around 16 inches from the hilt. And again, this class of sword would be known as an arming sword. Now, the total blade length is 28 inches. It has a wide blade width of 2 3/4 inches, and its blade material is a steel known as 65 MN, and it is, as you can see, pattern welded. Now, the finish with the pattern weld folds is satin, and the cross section is diamond, and it does feature a fuller that goes a little over half the length of the blade. Now, as we discussed in the historical section, the blade type is what would be known as an Oakshott Type 14. Now, moving on to the guard's total length is 7 3/4 inches. The quillion dimensions are 3/8 by 1/4 inch, and that swells to 5/8 of an inch at the quillion ends and tapers down to about 1/8 of an inch. The material, I believe, is a mild steel, but it could also be stainless with a satin finish. Now, the style of guard is what would be known in the Oakshott typology as a style 6. As we move on to the handle's total length is 4.5 inches. Its base circumference at the guard is 3.5 inches, and that slightly tapers to 3 inches at the pommel. The handle material is wood, and the grip material is a black flattened cord. Now, the pommel's dimensions are 2 1/8 of an inch by 2 1/8 of an inch. Its general circumference from the handle is 5 3/4 inches, and it is 5/8 of an inch thick. Now, the material, as with the guard, could be mild steel or possibly stainless steel with a satin finish. The hilt construction, as you can see, is peened. Now, the pommel type is what would be known as a Type J in the Oakshott typology. One of the defining features of the Type J being a wheel pommel is its central boss. Now, this sword does come with a wood core scabbard at no additional charge. The scabbard has a stitched leather overwrap of black leather and features a steel chape. It fits the sword well and is all around a really well-made scabbard, though its wood core is kind of on the thin side, and as you can see, the leather overwrap is kind of more the cheap upholstery leather type. The fit tends to be, as you can see, a little on the tighter side, which causes me to have to put more force into it when sheathing and unsheathing, a little bit more than I would like, but it does have a nice friction fit and overall fits the scabbard, fits the sword well with no rattle. So I would say actually, a pretty decent scabbard for the price point. Now this sword is new to the market. It should be released soon under the brand name Iron Wolf Forge in around the mid-spring of 2024. Now Iron Wolf Forge is the brand name for the Long Quan forge that is making these. And it will be direct shipped from them in China for distribution worldwide. Now you might have noticed this sword is very similar to another sword recently shown by another sword distributor out of China known as Swordier. Now this model is made by the same forge Swordier contracts to make their swords they sell. The Iron Wolf Forge branding is simply the owners of the forge wanting to sell various models of their design and manufacture directly to the open market. This sword, as well as two others, were given to me to review through collaboration with the owners of Iron Wolf Forge, as well as Mr. Paul Southern of Sword Buyer's Guide, to not only give my feedback on these models and their quality and durability, but also to judge their historical accuracy. I decided to review all three of these swords individually to give the best information I could for each sword, though did do an initial review beforehand directly to the manufacturer for all three, being prototypes that were sent to me. Now, regarding my opinions and ideas moving forward with the line, when this sword is released, it will retail at $230 with free worldwide shipping included. Now, overall, this sword, especially for the price point, is actually very well made. The lines are crisp and precise and proportional to the historical type it is focused on replicating. The blade itself is very nicely made and follows the design of the Type 14 very well. The fuller is crisp and terminates nicely, and the cross section is even. As mentioned before, the blade is pattern welded. Though not necessarily historically accurate for the type or period, it is nicely finished and looks authentic. The blade is sharpened and has a nice unbeveled edge geometry. Now onto the guard. It is crisp and well made with no sharp edges or marks. It is the proper dimensions for the grip and is a prime example of the Style 6 guard it represents. The quillions taper gradually and properly swell at the ends. The grip is finely shaped and ergonomic to the hand. It has a gradual taper as it reaches the pommel, and the grip material is a nice, solid hardwood constructed with a sandwich method. The grip depth, though, is, in my opinion, a little bit of a letdown, being cord. Though it is comfortable and functional, it is very simple and, not really very eye-catching. I mean, I guess at the price point, costs had to be cut somewhere, and I'd rather be it in something like the grip wrap than any other part of the sword. I mean, as a grip wrap, they are pretty easily customizable. And if you're interested in learning how to customize your grip and give them a really nice leather wrap, be sure to check out my grip wrap tutorial, also featured on this channel. Now, if we move on to the pommel, much like the guard, it is very crisp and well made with no sharp edges. It does have some slight grinding marks on the face and on the boss, but nothing too detrimental to the finish. The hilt parts are, as I believe, machined, and mainly that's because they are very precise and very accurate in dimension. The pommel itself is a fine example of a Type J pommel with its prominent central boss and wheel shape. The pommel is also properly pinned to the tang, though the finish is, a little slightly bulky with that Chinese style squared finish. Overall, though, I am very impressed with the fit and finish of this sword, especially at its sub $300 price point. Now, as far as handling, this sword feels very responsive in the hand. It does have a substantial amount of distal tapering, so it feels much lighter than it would without. The grip, again, is very ergonomic and comfortable to wield. As a sword, you could say this is one that could be pretty much swung all day if one wanted to without fatigue. Now, regarding durability, so far I have had no fears about this sword's capabilities as a medium to light cutting sword. Now, personally, due to the thin profile of this sword, I wouldn't want to push it too hard against heavier targets, but I feel that it is durable enough to handle them on occasion. Now, the heat treatment appears done properly, as again, it flex tests nicely and returns true. Overall, much like its fit and finish, I am very impressed with how well this sword handles and is surprised at what is offered at this sub $300 price point. In closing, I was very intrigued when Paul emailed me a little while back asking me if I would be interested in reviewing some new to the market prototype medieval swords from China. Now, most of these Chinese-made European swords I have owned and or handled have always felt and looked just a little off from what I generally expect, especially regarding historical accuracy, regarding blade typology and hilt families. Now, this sword did show me that with the proper focus on detail and historical accuracy, the Longquan Chinese market can compete in the European sword market. And, offering swords of this caliber in the sub $300 price point, in my opinion, is just icing on the cake for the modern budget sword enthusiast. Well, that's it for this review. I hope you enjoyed viewing it and that it helps with your opinion of the sword. Be sure to like and subscribe and look out for other future content from Dynamo Sword Channel. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.